Morning, this is a review of a Synergi electrical 4 kilowatt full hybrid inverter. It is, if you look at the shape of the unit, very definitely sort of out of the Voltronic stable. It is actually a Voltronic clone. I'm not quite sure who's cloning it, and I'm not quite sure why anybody would want to clone a Voltronic. My first impressions are not very good. If we look here at the unit, we have got quite a high PV voltage. My expert unit probably would be at this stage running at about 80, 77 thereabouts. The PV voltage is very high. I have concern about how efficient this MPPT actually is. 94 volts, that just tells me that it's not really working. 98 volts, even worse. Let's just go through the menu. It's a bit of a guessing game, and that's battery voltage and output, 13 amps I think going into it, and then there's different battery voltage. What was the previous one? That's a PV voltage. We just had a PV voltage of 87. Perhaps that's the PV voltage after the MPPT, maybe. Okay. Battery voltage, grid voltage, and inverter amps. Grid voltage, inverter amps again. Kilowatts, load, input frequencies, obviously being driven by our Jenny, 49.9, that's fine. And then we're back to the PV voltage. It's all a little bit sort of hazy. You're not actually sure quite what figures you're looking at. But I suppose once you spend time looking at the unit, but it's not clearly laid out what exactly you're looking at. What troubles me is if we go and look at my BMV, we're supposed to be charging the batteries, and it's all over the place. Yeah, we're charging only just, and then on occasions it then starts discharging. There we are, now it's starting to discharge, and it should only be charging. It should not be using any current from the battery. It should be supplying the load solely from solar and from the Jenny. Even with the iron off, it does very much the same thing, that the charging is all over the place. I would want to see later what happens if we switch the Jenny off, what happens to the charging. But the charging is all over the place and doesn't look particularly structured. Now we're going to look at the software that came with the inverter. Anybody who's used Voltronic's Watch Power will see where they got their inspiration from. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that it says PV voltage at 100 volts, which indicates to me that it either the solar charge controller is a very, very poorly configured MPPT, or in fact that it's a PWM. Second problem that I have is that if we look at the bottom here, it's very difficult to actually work out what these various things mean. They have absorb voltage at 50, whereas I have set my absorb voltage to 56.4. They have then what they call refloat voltage at 54.4, and that was what I set my float voltage to. Then they have float voltage at 56.4, which was my absorb voltage, and they have a battery low voltage at 34 volts. I cannot seem to change the amp hour rating of the battery. I can't seem to change the charger current according to on the software. I have changed it on the LCD screen on the inverter itself. Further, if you look at the inverter, it has a thing called SG grid and P grid, and I'm not quite sure what all these values are. Grid voltage of 211 volts, that's okay. it's running off a generator, but the values that come through don't make sense to me. If I then go to the help section, they have 9 pages with various screen grabs, but no information to actually tell you what the various screen grabs are showing and how one changes the settings, for instance. There's just no information, so the help is, I suppose, unhelpful. We can see parameter settings for 1, inverter search mode. I've got no idea what that means. Inverted charge from grid enable. I've enabled it, and here it shows as disabled. Now what do I believe? Do I believe the settings that I've set on the inverter, or do I believe the software? This is all a little bit frustrating. If we go to charger, it also only has one set of settings. At least the charger is enabled, but I've got no understanding of what those various parameters mean. Battery high voltage of 60 volts, I would say is too high on a AGM or a gel battery, and yet there's no supporting documentation to tell you what exactly you should be setting. If I try, and I'm prepared to try, set the battery amp hours to 260, and I can go click confirm, and it says charger reading success. I presume that means that it's taken that parameter. But if I go to back and system settings, oh, now it works. Okay, now we've managed to get one thing to work on this. I see I've got my battery amp hour set to 260. But my summary of this machine is that it's a poorly put together copy of a Voltronic product. I'm not happy with this high PV voltage. If we look at battery voltage 54.4, under the sunny conditions, we should be looking at about 88 to about 77 thereabouts. There are all sorts of things that are going on that one is not aware of, and there are settings that one would like to change, but you are uncertain what effect they are going to have on your charger, and more importantly on your batteries.